Hi everyone, thank you for attending our Questline webinar on the resurgence of e-newsletters and what it means for your utility. My name is Maureen Murky and I'm the technical producer of today's webinar. Before we begin, we want to cover just a few housekeeping items. To the left of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. Most of the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most of your desktop space. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A widget, which is directly below the presentation window. We'll try to answer all questions during the webcast, but if a more in-depth answer is needed or we run out of time, they will be answered later via email. Some networks may cause slides to advance more slowly than others, so logging off of your VPN is recommended. If your slides do fall behind, pushing F5 on your keyboard will refresh the page. If you experience any other disruptions during the broadcast, please use the Q&A widget for any technical questions. We will be sending everyone a follow-up email within the next few days, which will include a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation and a playback link to the recording of today's webinar. We will also be conducting poll questions during the presentation today and would greatly appreciate your participation. Please be aware that you are not the only participant today. The names of the other attendees are not being shown to you for privacy. Now, let me introduce today's host. Mike Carter is Senior Engineer for Questline. Mike has a Bachelor's in Engineering and an MBA degree from The Ohio State University. He's also a Certified Energy Manager. At Questline, Mike writes articles for newsletters, answers Ask an Expert inquiries, and develops webinars on energy topics. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mike, who will introduce our guests and get things started for us today.
Well, thank you, Maureen, and welcome to another webinar in our Plugged In series. This month's topic, of course, is the resurgence of e-newsletters. As shown in our agenda, we're going to discuss today how e-newsletters are performing today and what qualities produce the highest open rate. We're then going to look at how e-newsletters are such strong assets for brands and what this really means for your utility. Our speakers are then going to share 9 e-newsletter best practices, including positioning, readability, use of content, personalization, and design. And in between, you'll have a chance to answer some insightful poll questions. Now, we're going to share the answers with everyone, so be sure to participate, as Maureen just said. And at the end, we'll answer your questions. So just click on the Q&A icon on the left side of your screen with the question mark icon to submit any questions. So before we begin, though, let me introduce our 2 speakers for today. Bethany Farchione is Marketing Director at Questline. Bethany is responsible for the company's brand promotion strategy. Bethany has over 10 years of experience with content creation, public relations, and digital marketing. In addition to energy utilities, she's worked with clients in transportation, consumer packaged goods, retail, and healthcare. Ashley Gattuso, Director of Marketing at Simple Focus Software, combines the power of content creation and distribution to promote software as a service brands, included Curated.co, which is a newsletter creation and sending solution. She also produces a newsletter creator interview series, Screen Share, and Opt-in Weekly, a newsletter about, well, newsletters. She's also the organizer of Newsletter Fest, an online newsletter conference. I'm now going to launch the first of 3 polls today. As you can see here, the question is, how satisfied are you with your energy utility's current e-newsletter efforts? Maybe you're not satisfied at all, maybe you're extremely satisfied, or maybe it's just somewhere in between. So pick the level of satisfaction that really represents where you're at today with your utility's current e-newsletter efforts. We'll give you just a minute to participate in that. We really appreciate your participation. It really gives us some helpful feedback, and I think all of you will be interested in what everyone else is thinking about in terms of their e-newsletter satisfaction. A number of you are jumping on that. Appreciate that, and just give you a few more seconds and then we'll share the results and kick off with our speakers here today. And it looks like most of you have answered, and there seems to be a little bit of definitive direction here. So let me push the results, and everyone, you can see here that you're kind of in the middle, moderately satisfied for the most of you, a few more are really slightly satisfied. So it looks like we have some great room for improvement there. So with that, let's hear it from our speakers. So take control, Bethany and Ashley, and tell us how eNewsletters came to be.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I guess why are we even talking about newsletters in the first place? Newsletters have been around for a long time. Questline actually kind of launched its business on newsletters. Back in 1998, we were sending newsletters over fax machines, if you can believe it. Sending thousands of newsletters and faxes every month with hand-drawn pictures, and it wasn't until about 2003, I believe, that we started sending them over email. But ever since then, email e-newsletters have become just really popular, and lucky for all of us, they're cool again. They're really hot right now. They're going through a resurgence, and there's a reason why. Email newsletters are really, really effective. McKinsey data shows that they're 40 times more effective than social media. Excuse me. And that reason is because people choose to receive them. They're there to connect you with your customers. It's a repeat touch point that you can have with them. You're building a relationship with e-newsletters, and you build an audience. It builds loyalty with your customers. But of course, there's good and bad newsletters. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how you can make yours a good one and have it build that relationship. So handing it over to Ashley to jump into some of our points today.
Thank you, Bethany. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to join y'all today. So at Curated, we think a lot about what makes a newsletter good and what makes a newsletter bad. So what we have found is that successful e-newsletters serve an audience by being helpful. It's a relationship tool, and if you take an editorial approach to give advice, then that is your giving part of a relationship, right? So you have someone who gave you their email address, and now you are respecting that inbox attention and that email address that they gave you by actually using it to further the relationship, right? Ineffective, whichever word is appropriate there, newsletters fail when they are about the company instead of the person receiving it. So you can go through a newsletter two side by side and say, like, this one says you a lot, and it's about you, the hero in the story, right? The person receiving it. It's usually much better received than the one that says, we did this, we did that, we did this, don't you love us? That's just a relationship game played out in newsletters. So if your newsletter continually helps your readers, they'll be more receptive to future promotional content. So what we see a lot of brands, like the winning play right now with newsletters, is to use quality editorial content, like what we're doing with a lot of our blogs or articles online, but putting that content strategy within a newsletter and using the direct delivery of helpful editorial content to earn the right to be promotional. So an analogy I like to use is when you are feeding a baby. Has anyone ever fed a baby peas and something nice like apples? And even though I just like homemade all of my children's baby food, there was always a wide open mouth when something like apples or something sweet was coming to them. But then the bitterness of the peas, I had to like alternate, right? Or like 3 spoons of apples, 1 spoon of peas. Sometimes our promotions are that bitter part that we're selling something. We need to remind them we're selling something. You don't want a relationship where you're in the friend zone of like, I'm only sending you things that are not about what I sell. So the right measurement is probably like 80% editorial, 20% promotional, or even sometimes 90-10. But you can get that promotion in, and it is better received when they still love so much about what you're sending that the promotion is now a thing that they're like, oh, I might like to think more about that than a billboard blast of here's what we sell, here's what we do, here's what we sell, and then just a tiny bit of like, oh, and here's a helpful tip for you that might help. So I tend to promote editorial newsletter styles and see them as a lot more effective with readers.
Absolutely. I know that with our utility clients here at Questline, we follow that 80-20 rule. It's really important. While you want to share like philanthropy and community events that your company's doing, and your audience does want to hear some of that, but they'd rather hear the majority of the time that helpful content. And we actually see in our data that when people are engaged with your e-newsletter, they're more open. Like you said, you earn the right to do promotions, but not even just promotions in the e-newsletter. We find that they're 16% more likely to open promotional emails from your utility when they are also signed up for e-newsletters. So not only builds a relationship, it pays off in different ways.
So the open rate data that we all live by right now is soon to be not as insightful as it currently is, because Apple just announced some new privacy steps that they are going to allow people to take that would then not allow the tracking pixel to actually show us what's going on. So I'm going to give you a baseline right now. A good newsletter open rate currently is considered to be like 20% or above. 30% is really, really good. A lot of people come to me asking for newsletter advice, and they have a 40% open rate, and they don't even realize that that is good. So what we see across the platform at Curated is that across any list size, which we support only email newsletters right now. Like, so this is not like someone mixing in promotional and editorial. These are the ones who like maybe put something promotional within or are sending their promotional stuff through another sender. We see an average open rate of 43%. As that subscriber list count goes up, that goes down a little bit per like 1,000. But what Dan Oshinsky, who is a former editor of newsletters at BuzzFeed and at The New Yorker, has been quoted saying is that a best-in-class unique open rate is 30% or above. So you can obviously see that right now what the data shows us is that anything above 20 is actually like probably within your industry a great average. There are some ways you can just go Google and find industry averages because it's going to be nuanced or vary per industry. But what Apple has announced, which just happened last week, so I tried to cover it a little bit in last week's issue of Opt-in Weekly, what they are going to do is for the people who opt in to not be tracked or not have things seen, it's going to actually count them as an open, whether they opened it or not. So what newsletter creators and marketers are going to have to do, which is something we should always be doing, is go beyond the open rate, go into the click rates, look at what kinds of things are getting clicked. And the most important, actually talk to people. I would say no spreadsheet can replace 5 real conversations with 5 real customers who are telling you why they do or don't like what you are sending them, right? So we're going to see email open rates become not the standard measurement in the future. It's a great like litmus test, but right now to see if you're popular or not. But I think it's going to be another one of those dark funnel type things where you're seeing increased activity in purchases on your promotional emails because those editorial emails are doing well and earning you that cred, and you're going to have to correlate that doing this thing led to this thing, even though I can't tie it completely across. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a big thing that we're definitely all watching. It's like too soon to really tell what that impact's going to be. But open rates right now are a really important metric that we look at that may change over time, but there's so many other ways to look at engagement. And when we think about the utility industry specifically, data that we have is that 22 is about the average open rate for e-newsletters within the utility industry. So it's a little lower than what Ashley's sharing, but it's still within that really good performance level and within expectations of what kind of engagement you can get from an e-newsletter.
So in the past few years, there has been quite the resurgence in e-newsletter popularity. If you look back at the history of e-newsletters, it seems like it's like a cyclical thing. Like every 5 years or so, like email newsletters are dead. No, email newsletters are making a resurgence. And so we're in a time period right now, I think, especially with the way the pandemic impacted digital activity in general and a booming creator economy that we are seeing starting to use some of these tools, that has caused this sharp increase in their production in recent years. So you've got social platforms now trying to make a play for email newsletters. And if nothing tells you that they're popular and well received, it's when Facebook says like, hey, we need to get in the newsletter game, right? Twitter has already done it. Some other people have. So this trend kind of mirrors the continued importance of email in daily life and that ability to choose what you want to see and not have an algorithm choose it for you and kind of get out of the echo chamber. So email is still the best owned media, and that is according to the Click editor or founder, Russ Tenenberry. If you haven't subscribed to the Click and you're into marketing and want to get a daily email newsletter that makes you feel like a really smart marketer, go subscribe. It's 2 Ks in the Click, not CK. But basically what you're doing when you have an email newsletter is you're combining this ability to send directly, so it's owned media. You have their email address, you can send them something, with content strategy, which we all try to do in our blog posts, our social posts, our website content, which is deliver value over time to be top of mind or to make a good impression to the point where your brand is the brand they trust when they need to make a purchase decision. So they're very popular. There is this idea that you can do the distribution passively. You can send useful information, and you can include a little bit of personality. And Bethany and I were talking about that this morning because I was relaying to her that I use like an intro that has my picture and some personal story in the intro of something that happened to me last week for a brand newsletter. This is a newsletter for a brand, but I am personally injecting myself and my personality in there. And I have noticed over time that issues where I stay out and more like news reporter-esque than when I put a family story or put a thing that happened and tie that into newsletters, like there's a difference in the number of people who respond to me and say like, hey, I loved the prologue today, or you earned my trust by this, right? Kind of thing. That's basically what they're saying is, hey, I'm deeper in relationship with you and your brand because you didn't hide behind a corporate mask or like unknown identity. So they're extremely popular right now. People are more willing to subscribe to them right now. People are more willing to pay for e-newsletters right now.
Yep.
For that,
Ashley, for that personal intro, we have a few examples later, but we're seeing great success with key accounts for utilities when they're sending those messages. Adopting that type of intro has been working really well. So we'll go into that a little bit more in a bit.
So we kind of said this earlier, but the most successful emails are treated as an editorial product. You can see this in the news media. There's been a shift kind of for email newsletters. And they're now like kind of hosted by a person. This is this senior journalist who brings like maybe an informal tone or a personal touch. Examples would include publications like Morning Brew, the New York Times, Forbes. If you are not subscribed to an email newsletter from a news source or an entity you trust right now, you might be in a minority at this point. I think a lot of us have several that we follow, and the very fact that Morning Brew was able to escalate and grow as quickly as it did as they're a curated newsletter. They are not creating the news or going and reporting it. They are reporting the people who reported the news, right? They saw huge growth and were bought by, it's now Insider, but I still think of it as Business Insider because of that success. So there is power behind establishing a relationship with a reader that gets you inbox attention, that can convey whether you are a news source or a brand, because everything is a digital product these days.
Absolutely. And while utilities aren't going to be like the New York Times or whatnot with editorial in their own articles, they can take that approach with a curated focus. And this trend of people being more open to e-newsletters, people subscribe to so many, and reading more content in their inbox as it is on their phone is just a really good thing for utilities to take advantage of. People want to get this type of communication. They expect it from the brands that they work with, and they are really open to getting help within their inbox. They want that really specific content. So speaking directly to your customers, maybe it's different interests, like maybe you have a solar newsletter and it's all curated information about solar energy, or maybe there's one on just energy efficiency. People really look to e-newsletters as credible resources right now, and they're just a huge, powerful brand tool for utilities. So I'll give it back to Mike for our second poll question.
Well, thanks, Bethany and Ashley. The second poll question, as you can see here, which aspect of the newsletter creation is most difficult for your energy utility? We give you 6 choices. Admittedly, they all can be challenging, but what we'd like to know is what's the most difficult for your energy utility, and is it really speaking and directing your content to your customer, matching it with your customer's interests? Maybe it's achieving that right tone that you want to achieve. Is it getting great content, achieving high engagement? Maybe it's figuring out what's the best day of the week, time of day, and what kind of regular intervals should you be sending out the eNewsletter, or maybe it's about audience segmentation. So jump on that. Let us know which one of these is the most difficult for your utility. I see a number of you have done that. We appreciate that. And when I see it start to settle down here, we'll go ahead and share those results with everyone. I think you'll find the results somewhat surprising. And let me go ahead and share that with everyone here. So the biggest challenge seems to be sending on a regular cadence. Achieving engagement and segmenting is also a challenge. And so for some of you, it could be getting that great content that you need. Appreciate, again, your participation in that. And again, if what Ashley and Bethany have shared here has piqued a question in your mind, go ahead and look over to the left at that Q&A text box with the question mark icon. Click on that and submit your questions, and we'll address those here at the end. So I'm going to turn it back over to our speakers, who are going to share with us some eNewsletter best practices.
Bethany, I think you might be muted.
Sorry, go ahead. All you now.
Oh, okay. All right, so best practice number 1 is to position your newsletter like a product. So we talked a little bit about inbox attention, and I'm sure you get more emails in a day than you care to read at times. So it's hard to get, and it's hard to keep. So we advise people, or I at least do, not to just launch something, but to think about what content would be most valuable to your audience and what your unfair competitive advantage can be. So you want to create an experience for readers that becomes a habit and part of that routine that they have. So whether that is a daily newsletter that they're reading over coffee every morning or on their commute, or a monthly newsletter that comes across and they recognize it and they know, like, this is worth my time once a month, right? So it's about strategizing your content so they look forward to that email. And we have here below the fold, this is a newsletter. And what I want to point out about below the fold is that their value prop, the way they have positioned themselves, is that news you might not see anywhere else, right? And the whole premise of the newsletter is they bring in like maybe 3 or 4 stories that they feel like were in the news, but did not get the attention they deserved because they weren't flashy, buzzy headlines, right? And so you can do this as a brand that thinks like a media company, right? You don't have to assume that like you should be like every other newsletter that your persona is getting. In fact, you will get more attention if you figure out a way to stand out and differentiate from that crowd and deliver information either in a different way, in a different voice, or like package it differently, or give them a top 10 list. Like get creative and find out what they already get that they or could be getting that you could differentiate from. A second best practice is to create an opt-in experience that works for your customers. So there's a little debate always going on about double and single opt-in. The latest research shows that I feel like Litmus did a study, and their stance on the whole thing was to actually use double opt-in for some things and single opt-in for others, so that if someone wanted to be able to quickly subscribe to a newsletter without having to get an email and confirm and have it go back, that would be a preferred method. Some people are very serious about not wanting to have people on their list who might not have wanted to and want them to like say, yes, I want to receive this kind of thing. So it works differently. With Curated, we have like a manual way of getting on my newsletter list if you check a permission box as you sign up for the free trial. So you're going to think about the ways that they become a part of your newsletter audience and how that flow will work for them, and try to create something that they will enjoy and is easy for them. You also can send like either a welcome email or a first email or something that kind of brings them into the fold and doesn't just say like, hey, thanks for coming, but also says like, here are some great resources for you right now until you get the next issue. All right, number 3, stop focusing on links and focus on readability. So I did a presentation with Margot Aaron. She presented at Newsletter Fest, and people ask Margot of that seems important. If you want to go find the genius that is her website, or Hamya, her video series, which is #HAMYAW for Hillary and Margot Yell at Websites, which is like just one of the most entertaining things for marketers on the internet right now. She gets the question all the time, like, what is the magic word count, right? Mm-hmm. And there is no magic word count. there is what you need to write to communicate a point, right? So it needs as many or as few words as it takes to communicate that point, but it also depends on the audience you are sending to. So what I advise people to do is stick to readability, not word count. When people complain something is long, what they're really saying is it's boring. Because I will read something extremely long if it is entertaining, right? I will also read something short if it is entertaining. But the thing that newsletter creators can do to work within, like you're sending on a phone, right? So you kind of need to like look at how the content and the formatting is broken up as a social scroll almost, because we are a society who is now prone to scrolling. So studies show that people go deeper in emails now than they did like 5 or 10 years ago, because they're used to like, oh, there might be something better below, right? Like our minds are triggered that way. So what you want to do is write for readability, and that would mean like short sentences, make it skimmable, add bullet points, make bold text happen, and have like clean headlines and text size and color so that someone who gets this in the middle of their meeting who wants to skim it can skim it, while someone who gets it and knows they want to go in depth can read all the between the headers content. So we have some people who open our emails 2 or 3 times because we have different categories, or they might have opened it and they knew they wanted to go back, etc. So write for all the different types of readers and format it in that way, but stop worrying about extreme word count being, or like how short it should be being an issue. Worry about like, does this pack a punch of helpful information in whatever word count you're presenting in.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about different utility audiences, we have found some things that could be considered a rule of thumb that you can use. So key account customers tend to like that longer form or more technical content. They like to go really in depth with topics, while residential customers want that fast hitting, entertaining, helpful advice that they can apply. And it may be surprisingly, small business customers are more like those residential customers. They want the quick hitting information where they can read a sentence or two and get the main idea, and then decide if they want to go read more in depth about something. So again, it's who your audience is and what they want is what you should deliver.
So use a combination of curated and original content. And this is a trick I learned early on as a writer and a journalist working for marketing, right? Because I was bringing over this whole like, oh, you write it all, right? And then I realized you could report what other people had written, and you could get information to people a lot faster, and also use that as kind of a MVP to test and see what they are really interested in. So I coach people to work with partners to curate quality content for them, and to not be afraid to like share links to articles that they didn't write. Here's a challenge that I took on last year, because Dennis Shao, who has Content Corner, a newsletter, one of his like resolutions for 2021 was like, or a challenge for me to resolve to do, is to actually link to content that was created by an adjacent or a competitor brand, because it's kind of like a confidence move, right? Like, hey, this competing brand created this quality content, and even though I didn't write it, I know it will be valuable to you, kind of move. So if you've got that kind of stance and can take it, like, don't be afraid to do it. Don't also be afraid like to share just industry news from credible news sources. So you want to do the same thing that like your teachers who taught you to write academic papers like coached you to do, right? Question the credibility of the source of the content that you are sharing, and say, if I was the person receiving this, would I find this helpful, or is this misinformation, or is this like, can I find a source that presents this in a better way? So a good example is someone shared something in a newsletter last week that I wanted to also share in mine, but it was just a slide deck. And I could share the slide deck, and it had a lot of great, like, how I grew my newsletter tips in the slide deck. But I was like, this looks like a slide deck. Like, surely there was a verbal presentation going on with this. So I quickly Googled and found a better way to share that, which was the YouTube video that had not only the slide deck, but the person presenting those slides, right? So your job as a curator, if you're combining some stuff you write on your own and some stuff you're bringing in from other resources, is to be the person who takes the time to find the good stuff to share, so that they don't have to go out and sift through the flood of information that's on the internet right now to find that good information themselves. So that is your service that you're providing. Okay, so content creation, I think this is like aligned with that third bullet on that page, which is that content takes time to create. So it's good to test with curated content. It takes like maybe 3 weeks to a month sometimes to write a blog. Infographics can take a month to produce. Videos can take an average of 2 months to write and record. As a growth marketer, that sounds scary to me, because I can't just find something, share it, or like write a little something and get feedback, right? Because the more we use this term with our Girl Scouts a lot. I'm a mom of Girl Scouts, so I lead a troop, is to fail forward. And sometimes that is through writing something on your own very quickly and putting it into the world to see who bites. And sometimes that is through taking something someone else has written that is ideal for your audience. It might not be a competitor. It might just be, the New York Times. Or if you were in marketing, it might be Marketer Hire. They have great articles on their website, right? And so it could be testing to see if there's interest there. And Scott, oh gosh, can't remember his last name. Scott from Up Content has this expression that he uses when he puts out a curated newsletter, which is he looks at what gets engagement and he uses that to dictate what he will have his company write a blog about. And so he calls that fattening the right tail. So videos are great to include links to in newsletters, but they do take a long time. So if you can link to someone else's video, which gets a lot of views, then you've like accelerated the speed at which you are delivering helpful content.
Yeah, and I saw in the survey response that finding good content, creating good content is one of the biggest hurdles for people producing e-newsletters. And this is really why Questline exists. I mean, we know that energy utilities and marketers in general have a hard time finding the time to develop quality blogs, infographics, and videos. It takes a lot of effort, and being able to share that content and pull from a resource that already has quality information that you know is trusted is a really great way and a simple way to engage your customers.
I have something to add to that, Bethany.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's important to say that just because you're sharing something that another entity published does not mean you cannot contextualize it for your audience. So there's a value also in, here is what was published, here is the reason it should be important to you, and bringing that voice in to say, like, our brand has this point of view on this content that's in this article.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if you want to share an article about what the weather predictions are for the summer and then how it's going to impact customers in their energy rates, and by all means, you can link out to a credible source and grow on that topic. It's a definite good way to build content. One of my favorite practices is talk like this isn't the first time you two have met. People like to get information from people they know. They love to have that personal touch. So over here we have an example of Ashley's newsletter too. She does that intro every week when she sends it out, and it's always a good read. And then over here we have an example from a Questline customer who does their key account e-newsletters. Each key account person includes an intro, it signs it with their name, It also typically has their photo too. It just adds this personal touch. So you're not getting your e-newsletter from an entity. When you work with an individual account manager, you're getting your e-newsletter from that account manager, and they have something to say to you, and they've curated this content for you each week, each month, however often you're receiving it. This new, or going back to approach of being very personalized and talking to people over email, it's just been really refreshing. It's way more engaging.
We also had a picture of Taco.
Yeah.
If you recognize Taco from Trello, I've met the team behind Taco from Trello. But the reason we included this is as a helpful tip is if you're sending through Gmail, and I think some other clients use this now, there's like an image, right, that shows up in the inbox next to the subject line and title. It's like, this is from, do you want to be like red blob? Do you want to, with initials, do you want to be a logo? Or do you want to be a picture of a person? Because they're more likely to open it if it's like coming, like I sound very vain right now, but I feel like people opt-in weekly, they see my picture in their inbox, right? People open the Taco from Trello newsletter because it comes from Taco, and how creative is that, right? So think about little things like that. Think about the inbox experience and what things you can do to make this feel more like a message from a friend than a message from a company.
I can't believe I almost forgot to bring up Taco. I love when I see that in my inbox. And similar for like utilities, if rather than from ABC Utility, it's from Tyler at ABC Utility. Just that small change makes a big difference.
All right, so make the content engaging. Your number one thing to do in your newsletter is to include really good content. I will skip a week. I will not put a category that recurs in my newsletter in it if there is nothing good to share, right? I would rather not send than send fluff or send something that is not helpful. So don't be afraid to write the best stuff to be consumed in the newsletter itself. After all, the goal of content is to be consumed, not to track a recipient's behavior by forcing them to click through, by like teasing that they've got to go somewhere else for the content. If you have bullet points to share from an article you are sharing, include the bullet points in the newsletter because they've already taken the step to open it. You've got their attention right there. So I would say the places you are sending them for more should be just that, for more. You want to use good quality images. You want to use infographics. You can use videos, like you can see in this My Utility one, that there's a play button like layered over this image so that people will click through and go play the video. Videos perform really well compared to other types of content right now. If you want to share, put a play button on an image and send people to it. But if you're looking at a newsletter and it looks like an HTML website, like jammed into a newsletter, like you're trying to recreate like a very complicated multi-column web page, rethink that and think about how this is going to be perceived on a mobile device, and stick to one column, stick to something clean, make it easy, not just skimmable, but visually skimmable.
Absolutely. And you hit on video. We have just seen that videos perform so well in e-newsletters, even clicking over. So it's not necessarily you can watch it in your inbox. There's some limitations on that, but we have seen last year alone, there were over 90,000 views of videos directly from e-newsletters that we sent out. And then people spent over 1.5 minutes watching those videos. So they like to receive that content. They like to engage and view it that way from a newsletter.
Next best practice is to use a simplistic design. So this goes back to the one column look. I think I jumped ahead of myself when I was talking then. But readability is the most important thing. Mobile and desktop. Okay, so more than 40% of emails are opened on mobile devices. Don't underestimate their engagement with your newsletter. Like, email in itself is kind of like, it's your most popular app on your phone, if you think about it. So you want to use high quality images, and you want to, here's a trick, for people who block images, you want to name that image something not embarrassing, right? Sometimes people will name things something embarrassing, and you want to name it actually something quite descriptive so that it encourages them to show all images.
When we're talking to utilities, we found that best for design is typically to include about 5 sections. Well, again, there's no hard, fast rule for length or how you should write short form, long form. We have found that over testing, keeping the sections to about 5 or under 5 with a main head idea has been the best design performance for e-newsletters. And so also, consistency of sending is a best practice that I saw in the survey, again, that some of you might find this part difficult. And I think the hardest part about being consistent is filling in quality content. So maybe you don't feel as though you have the time to send it, but people, like Ashley said earlier, look to e-newsletters as a habit. It's something that they do every morning. It's something they do every month. If you can keep that cadence, it's great. So if you're sending quarterly, it's likely that they're probably going to forget about you and it's not going to become a habit. So sending at least once a month is a best practice. And then this is our last best practice that we wanted to bring up today. Segmentation is something that's really important. So newsletters, besides maybe a general New York Times newsletter that's covering a ton of stuff, they usually are about one particular topic. And then within, say, the New York Times again, you can choose to receive their sub-newsletters, which are segmented on, maybe you just want to hear about stocks, maybe you just want to hear about culture and events. We've seen that that approach is also successful for utilities. So last year we had a client that was sending out their key account newsletters, and they saw a little drop in engagement over time. And so we decided to break it out for their healthcare, their manufacturing, their education, because as you can imagine, what a healthcare facility needs to do for their energy is very different from manufacturing. And when we did that, they saw an 84% jump in engagement in their content. So they were sending people what they wanted specifically for that audience, and their audience appreciated it. They got the information that they needed, and they didn't have to sift through all the other articles that were there. So overall, we've seen that when you segment your e-newsletters by topic or by audience, that you can receive a 22% higher open rate and 44% higher click-through rate. And those are monumental differences in performance and how happy you can make your customers with that quality content. So I'm going to give it back to Mike. Oh, sorry. Can you grab it again?
Oh, no problem.
I feel like we're at a relay race.
Yeah.
That's right.
Sending you the baton.
Well, thanks, Bethany and Ashley, for your great insights into e-newsletters. So we're going to go ahead and take some questions right now from the audience. You guys have submitted some great questions. And the first one, actually, there's 2 questions. So I'll ask the first, and then we'll get to the second. And the first question is, should you create unique content for e-newsletters? Or is repurposing your printed publications in an electronic format okay? And actually, I'm going to ask you to comment first on this.
Get the most out of every piece of content that you create. I call that creating scalable content, right? And I think we get in this like vortex or something as marketers who are deep in our brands, where we feel like, well, we said that once. No, like 5% of people heard it. Say it again, and say it again 10 or 15 times. Or write a blog article that then is 5 steps to do a thing, and include 1 step as like a recurring series in your newsletter and your social posts and everywhere else. So yes, repurpose until everyone in your audience can say, I know that and I understood that. Like, don't be afraid to have a repeat piece of content, even in your newsletter, that like you've said 2 or 3 times, because you have new people subscribing all the time, and you have people who missed an issue. Like, so you can't live in a place where you're like, everything I've read, they've read and understood. If you're saying something helpful a second time, that just makes it that much more helpful because it's understood. I'm one of those people who can attend a webinar and then go back and look at short clips from it, and it means more to me after when I've heard it twice. So no problem with that. In fact, I encourage it.
All right. Well, here's the second question, or the second part of that question. So, for example, for an e-newsletter, would 1 or 2 sentences and then a URL link to a blog post on your website be acceptable?
Yes. Bethany, do you want to take that away? I think you might be able to give the utility perspective because you'll have so much more research on that audience and what they like to engage with.
Yeah, I think that that's actually a best practice. That's a great way. You can include specific things, full content in your newsletter, but a lot of times the best thing to do is send people to more information. So that little snippet, that 2-sentence information, and then linking over to more is a best practice. I recommend people do that, yes.
Okay, how about this? What about snippets? Should those be included in the count of articles?
See if I'm understanding that one correctly. So if you have like 5 sections, say, each section would have an image and a snippet. So I think that they are included within that number.
Okay. Another question, how much time does it take to implement and sustain an e-newsletter? So broad question, but what's your viewpoints on that?
Do you want me to talk from personal experience and then you say like what the utility approach has been? Okay, so I tell people, if you're working individually or as a team, that a quality newsletter is going to take your team collectively, not individually, but collectively, somewhere between 5 and 8 hours. So that might be 1 work day a month for a monthly across your team, or from 1 individual. But when I saw that sending at a regular cadence is a challenge for the people in this audience, the thing I think through, and I've been at companies that operated this way before, is that you kind of have to decide how much of a priority the newsletter is to your team, and then give it that bandwidth when you start project managing it against what else you have going on. Because I've been at companies where the newsletter is an afterthought, and it's a thing you do because you've always done it. And those tend to result in poorer quality newsletters, because it's kind of like there's some meeting 2 days before and it's like, oh, our newsletter is due, what are we going to put in it? Kind of thing. And I think if you go into like the Curated YouTube account, or you search like Megan Bowen customer success newsletters or something along those lines, or maybe y'all can include this in the follow-up email. She did a great presentation at Newsletter Fest about why CS deserves a table at the newsletter, because what you're doing at some point is customer marketing, right? And you're maintaining a relationship with them. And she kind of broke down the reasons why, more than just marketing, should be putting that newsletter out, because the CS team is the person who is most deep in the concerns of the customer at any given time, and can kind of understand what it is that they need to be hearing about. So I would say you're going to have like 5 to 8 hours devoted to this per newsletter, unless you kind of figure out how to streamline that, or you're going with something quite short that's really just more of what I would think of as an e-blast, where it's just one piece of content and a link.
Yeah, I'd add on only that it varies. You know, you can be writing all of your own content and it takes a really long time, or if you have access to a library of really useful content that you can pick and choose from, it's going to take a lot less time to pull that together. And if you have the team behind it too, that also helps cut things down. And yeah, it doesn't have to be labor intensive.
One thing that I suggest to teams that are hoping to put out newsletters is to use it not only as an external tool, but to use it as an internal tool to improve their understanding of what their audience cares about. Mm-hmm. By working as a team and not having it be time blocked, but when you see content that your audience ought to care about or that would help them, that you're sharing it with your team in some sort of repository where all that information is going, and that it's almost as important to send that newsletter internally as it is to externally, so that everyone is getting in the mindset of the people that you want to have the strongest relationship with, your customers.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we've run out of time today, so let's launch our last poll for today. The question is, how useful was this information presented in the webinar today? You got 5 choices there. We really appreciate your feedback on that. While you're doing that, let me move to that. Someone's going to do that. Fantastic. Let me give maybe just a wrap up with some key takeaways of, I think, what we heard today. I think obviously we heard that e-newsletters are a welcomed and popular form of customer communication. We heard that newsletters should be about people receiving them, not about the companies producing them. That was a great point, I think it was made today. We learned that people want more personalized content, so we need to speak specifically to their interests. And I think we also can improve newsletters by focusing less on the ideal length and focus more on readability, so short sentences. And I heard our speakers talk about how they should be skimmable. And then certainly it's going to be to your benefit to work with partners to curate quality content for you, and also help you increase e-newsletter engagement with images, infographics, and video. Now, before we finish today, actually, why don't you share about a special event scheduled for tomorrow? I think our audience will be interested in.
Sure. Thank you for giving me a moment to do this. I feel like, like at the end of the timeshare thing when they're like, now I'm going to sell you something, but I'm not trying really to sell you something. Just if you're interested, you will not hurt my feelings if you're not interested. But I do have a valuable, I think, for newsletter creators, event going on tomorrow with Russ Henneberry from The Click. I mentioned him earlier in the presentation. He and I are going to be doing a 4-hour, we're calling it a mastermind. It's like an intensive with plenty of time for Q&A session about creating and testing your newsletter strategy. So it's a newsletter content strategy mastermind. That's a mouthful, right? And it is a paid event. So it's like $2.99 to attend. So I just want to be upfront about that. It is something we're paying for. He is a renowned speaker. He's formerly worked at digitalmarketer.com, and he speaks for a living, right? So he comes in and consults with people on all of their marketing, including their newsletters. And I think it's going to be super insightful for people who are in that mode of either overhauling a newsletter and want to redo the content strategy, or are just starting out and trying to figure out what it is that they should be writing about and how to kind of test the waters and see how it's going to perform. And you can find that, sorry, I should say this, if you go to my newsletter, Opt-in Weekly, is at optinweekly.com, and it's down when you scroll to Curated News. So anyone interested, I would love to see you there. If you do come, let me know you're there so I can give you a digital high five.
All right, now let's hear some closing comments from Maureen.
I think Maureen might be muted.
Oh,
good.
Thank you. I hit the button and it didn't work. Yay, technology. But thank you. I'm back. Thanks, Mike, and thank you to all of you for attending our webinar today. As a reminder, the presentation materials and the playback links to the recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you within the next couple of days. Should you have additional questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll be taking July off for our Plugged In webinar series, but join us again on August 12th, where we will discuss using interactive content to engage customers. So thank you again for attending, everyone, and have a great day.